युक्त आसीत मत्परः वशे हि यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत मत्परः वशे हि यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत मत्परः वशे हि यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत मत्परः वशे यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत मत्परः वशे हि यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत मत्परः वशे हि यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता तानि सर्वाणि संयम्य युक्त आसीत मत्परः वशे हि यस्येन्द्रियाणि तस्य प्रज्ञा प्रतिष्ठिता तानि these senses, those senses, sarvani, all, sanyamya, keeping under control, yuktaha, engaged, asita, should be situated, matparaha, in relationship with me, vashe, in full subjugation, he, certainly, yasya, one whose, indriyani, senses, tasya, his, prajna, consciousness, pratishtita, fixed. Once again, this is Bhagavad-gita, chapter 2, text 61, translation by Srila Prabhupada. One who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada. That the highest conception of yoga perfection is Krishna consciousness is clearly explained in this verse. And unless one is Krishna conscious, it is not at all possible to control the senses. As stated above, the great sage Durvasa Muni picked a quarrel with Maharaj Ambarish, and Durvasa Muni unnecessarily became angry out of pride, and therefore could not check his senses. On the other hand, the king, although not as powerful a yogi as the sage, but a devotee of the Lord, silently tolerated all the sage's injustices, and thereby emerged victorious. The king was able to control his senses because of the following qualifications, as mentioned in Srimad-Bhagavatam 9:4, 18 through 20. Savai manah Krishna padaravindayor vachansi vaikuntha gunanu varnane Karau harir mandiram arjanadisho shrutim chakarachyuta satkathodaye Mukunda lingalaya darshanidrishao tadbhritya gatrasparashenga sangamam Khranam cha tatpada saroja saurabhe Srimad Tulasya rasanam tad arpite Padau harehe kshetra padanusarapane Shiro hrishikesha padabhivandane Kamam cha dasye natu kama kamyaya Yathottama shloka janashlayaratihi King Ambarish fixed his mind on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna and gauged his words in describing the abode of the Lord, his hands in cleansing the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing the pastimes of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the form of the Lord, his body in touching the body of the devotee, his nostrils in smelling the flavor of the flowers offered to the lotus feet of the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulasi leaves offered to him, his legs in traveling to the holy place where his temple is situated, his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in fulfilling the desires of the Lord. And all these qualifications made him fit to become a matpara devotee of the Lord. The word matpara is most significant in this connection. How one can become matpara is described in the life of Maharaj Ambarish. Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, a great scholar and acharya in the line of the matpara, remarks, Mad bhakti prabhavena sarvendriya vijaya puravikas swatma drishti sulabheti bhavaha. That means the senses can be completely controlled only by the strength of devotional service to Krishna. Also, the example of fire is sometimes given. Quote, as a blazing fire burns everything within a room, Lord Vishnu, situated in the heart of the yogi, burns up all kinds of impurities, end quote. The Yoga Sutra also prescribes meditation on Vishnu and not meditation on the void. The so-called yogis who meditate on something other than Vishnu simply waste their time in a vain search after some phantasmagoria. We have to be Krishna conscious, devoted to the personality of Godhead. This is the aim of the real yoga. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Gnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtham Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tatta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa sindhubhya eva cha patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. One who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence. We may recall, if we've been paying attention, that in verse 54, Arjuna has asked several questions because he's really interested in what he's hearing. And he wanted to know, what are the signs by which I can recognize the kind of person that you're talking about? This section of the Bhagavad-gita is known as the Sthita Prajna section because it describes the person who is called Sthita Prajna, that is to say, fixed in his consciousness. So Arjuna had asked, among many other things, he said, Kim asita? How is this person seated? The word asita means seated. It can mean other things as well, as we'll see in a moment. So today's verse is in answer to that particular question, Kim asita? How is a person situated, or how is a person seated? And according to Madhvacharya, who also comments on this section, the three verses beginning from text 59, which we recall as Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehinaha rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishtva nivartate, which means, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he's fixed in consciousness. A very famous verse. So that verse and the next verse and this verse and the one after that, up until text number 62 perhaps, they're actually dealing with the difficulty of controlling the senses, at the same time that they're dealing with the absolute necessity of controlling the senses. There is no knowledge without controlling the senses. It just cannot happen. In the commentaries of the Acharyas on the Chatushloki verses of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, the four seed verses in which Krishna has given the essence of all the Bhagavatam's teachings to Lord Brahma, they make the point, I think it was Jiva Goswami who makes the point, that when one is aware of Yogamaya and functioning within the realm of Yogamaya, he cannot understand the reality that is experienced by a person who is instead conditioned by Mahamaya. And when one is in Mahamaya, he cannot understand the reality that is experienced by someone who is instead conditioned by Yogamaya. They're not compatible at all. They're antithetical. So that's the principle behind Madhvacharya's emphasis that to control the senses is impossible without a mighty effort. And yet at the same time, there's actually no possibility of this experience of this Atma that Krishna is talking about, the Param Drishti that he mentioned a few verses ago. It's just not possible without this knowledge. So he calls this knowledge aparokshanubhuti. That is to say, direct experience. Why do we say direct? Really, it's better to use a Kantian term, a philosophical term, immediate experience. What does immediate mean? There's no mediation. In this material world, our experience of what we call reality is always mediated. Mediated. What is it mediated by? Think. What is the agent? What's the go-between? What's the broker of experience within this material world?
Our senses.
Our senses. Very good. Very good. That's why we have to control those senses. So, immediate knowledge, or aparokshanubhuti, direct experience of the Supreme Absolute Truth, according to all the Vedanta acharyas, that is something which cannot be had by someone who is too much wrapped up in the world of the senses. This is maybe a spin-off of what Krishna has said elsewhere in Bhagavad-gita in another very important verse. When he says, Yesham tvantagatam papam jananam punya karmanam te dvandva moha nirmukta. The idea of being dvandva moha nirmukta, freed from the illusory dualities that are born of this sensual existence. Krishna has said there that person can engage in devotional service with mature determination. In other words, he can be sthita prajna. He can be yukta asita, which is another word used in this connection. Yukta asita. We'll get to that in a moment. But the idea is that without sense control, there's no possibility of knowledge. And the problem is that we can control our senses, and this is what Krishna has mentioned in the previous verse, text 69. When we control our senses and keep them away from the things that they crave, then particularly with regard to eating, this is the example that he's given, so I'll continue on that example. When we fast, our minds may become agitated because the mind is the repository of that taste. The inclination to eat, let's say when you're sick and you have to fast, the inclination to eat is also less. And we may have experienced, if we've fasted considerably, that the more you fast, the less inclined you are to eat. And the senses also become weakened because the body is not being energized by that intake of nutrition and hydration. So the inclination for the sense gratification may decrease if we simply restrict our senses from the food, but the taste will remain because it is embedded in the microchip of the mind. Therefore, that is where the attack has to be made. That's where the effort has to be, the mighty effort that Madhvacharya has mentioned, that's where it has to be focused. How do we eradicate that taste? Krishna has said, param drishtva nivartate, by experiencing something higher. Madhvacharya has told us that higher thing is aparokshanubhuti, direct experience of the Supreme Absolute Truth, or even the Atma, the Self, but ultimately the Supreme Self, which is Krishna, the Supreme Spirit. So, sanyamya means to, having controlled the senses. Now, yukta means properly. More literally, does anybody know what yukta means? Think yoga, because it's coming from the same root.
Engaged.
Yes, to be engaged or even united, we can also say. Joined. Yuj. Yuj means yogas, yukta, yoga, all these terms are coming from the same dhatu, the same root, which is yuj. To join, to unite with something, to be on the same page even with something, we can say. So properly, it also means properly because that's the best fit when you're doing something that's united, that's in harmony with Krishna, then it fits, and therefore it's proper, yukta. So yukta asita. Asita means, we mentioned already, to sit down, and this is literal definition of that term. It's how Sridhar Swami takes it in his commentary on the Bhagavad-gita. Baladev or Ramanujacharya takes it a little bit differently. He says it means samahita. Samahita means to collect and to be situated, a more general sense of the term. They're both perfectly acceptable, they're both harmonious. And then matpara is, as Prabhupada points out here, something that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also says. Matpara is a very important term, because matparaha means somebody who's given to me. In Sanskrit, when you put this suffix para on the end of a noun, it means you're attached to that noun. You're attached to that particular thing. You're given to that thing. You're inclined towards that thing. Matpara. So when Krishna says matpara, he means implicitly my devotee. The person who's attached to me, in other words. So that's a key term here. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, therefore, he also quotes from Srimad-Bhagavatam, 11th canto, chapter 29, texts 2 and 3, which I'll just run through quickly. Prayashaha pundarikaksha yunjanto yogino manaha vishidantya asamadhanan manonigraha karshitaha athata anandadukham padambuja hangsa shreyeran. The gist of it is that although the yogis, the persons whose senses are not very well controlled, in other words, the non-devotees, they may try very hard, but they have to struggle to control the mind. But the devotees who are naturally situated in love of Krishna, very happily, they endeavor to serve Krishna in so many ways, and they naturally control their senses. Baladev Vidyabhushan, he therefore says that he raises a rhetorical question. If even the siddhas, those who are perfect in their yoga practice, if they don't know the Atma, then how can we know the Atma? How can we know this Atma? You can take in a vague sense, because Atma means either the individual soul or it means the supreme spiritual entity, which is Krishna. So if even those who are perfect in controlling their senses can hardly know the absolute truth, then how is it possible? That's why the word matpara is so important. He echoes what Baladev has said. Who can know this Atma? He says the matpara. Now he quotes a verse from Vishnu Purana, 6.7.74, which was also quoted by Ramanujacharya in his commentary on this verse, which is a nice one. He says, Yathagnir uddhata shikha kaksham dahati sanilaha tatha chitta sthito vishnur yoginam sarvakilabisham. Just as just as when you have wind, the flames of the fire are excited and they burn up dry wood. In exactly that same way, Vishnu, he destroys all of the inauspicious or sinful activities of those who are so situated in yoga practice. This is an interesting little detail here. Srila Prabhupada is mentioned in his purport, the same verse, and he writes, as blazing fire burns everything up within a room, Lord Vishnu, situated in the heart of the yogi, burns up all kinds of impurities. Now I just translated the word kaksha as dry wood, because that's one of the many meanings it has. Kaksha also means a room, so there's no problem there either. Anyway, the idea is that if a person is engaged in devotional service seriously, and all of his senses are yukta asita, properly employed, in union with the Lord's desire and engaged in the Lord's service, and situated well, firmly in that way. In other words, this is nishtha bhakti we're talking about. Then for that person, his senses are automatically controlled. And it's no longer a big struggle. It's no longer the mighty effort that Madhvacharya was suggesting earlier. Now that's what brings us to Srila Prabhupada's purport. I'm going to go through each sentence of this purport, line by line, and you will maybe recognize some of the things that we've already heard from predecessor acharyas. First of all, Srila Prabhupada writes that the highest conception of yoga perfection is Krishna consciousness is clearly explained in this verse. So that we know from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, because he's already told us that this verse is describing the characteristic of the siddha, the person who is perfect in controlling his senses, not the sadhaka, which means a person who's only attempting to control the senses. This verse is describing a perfect person. And that's implicit in Srila Prabhupada's first sentence. Unless one is in Krishna conscious, it is not at all possible to control the senses. That's something that we've learned from both Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur and Baladevi Vidyabhushan, with their emphasis on the word matpara, meaning a person devoted to me, the devotee. Now, Prabhupada is adding something completely new here, which he does sometimes in his purports. It would seem as if it's new, but I'll explain in a moment that it's only really an illustration of what has already been stated. He says, as cited above, and he's referring to the previous purport, in which he had mentioned King Ambarish, the great sage Durvasa Muni picked a quarrel with Maharaj Ambarish, and Durvasa Muni unnecessarily became angry out of pride, and therefore could not check his senses. On the other hand, the king, although not as powerful a yogi as the sage, but a devotee of the Lord, silently tolerated all the sage's injustices, and thereby emerged victorious. In the Christian Bible, I think they have this saying, the meek shall inherit the earth. So, the king was able to control his senses because of the following qualifications. This is again something that confirms what we've learned from Baladevi Vidyabhushan, from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, regarding the importance of devotional service, the absolute necessity of devotional service for anyone who wants to control the senses. Because if you look at it, we hear. If you listen to this verse, you'll see we're talking only about the senses here. King Ambarish, quote, King Ambarish fixed his mind, that's sense number one, on the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, engaged his words in describing the abode of the Lord, his hands in cleansing the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing the pastimes of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the form of the Lord, his body in touching the body of the devotee, his nostrils in smelling the flavor of the flowers offered to the lotus feet of the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulasi leaves offered to him, his legs in traveling to the holy place where his temple is situated, his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in fulfilling the desires of the Lord. And all these qualifications made him fit to become a matpada devotee of the Lord. This is how Srila Prabhupada has translated this verse for this purport. Elsewhere in the Bhagavatam, he's translated it differently. So Srila Prabhupada is making it very clear with his own contribution to what we've heard from the predecessor acharyas, just to illustrate the importance of the purport, which is you have to engage your senses in the service of Krishna. Otherwise it will be impossible to control those senses. And without controlling those senses, you will never have direct knowledge of the self or of the absolute truth. And without that direct, immediate realization, we should say, of what is reality, then you are not going to go anywhere. This is the point. We're not going to advance towards this ideal of sthita prajna, fixed consciousness that Krishna is describing. So these are just a few things we can think about with regards to this verse. There's one more thing that Srila Prabhupada adds at the very end. He kind of tacks it on here. He mentions, the Yoga Sutra also prescribes meditation on Vishnu and not meditation on the void. I looked at 5 commentaries on this verse in preparing for this class. So these things may be stated in someone else's commentary, I don't know. But it's a fact that after listing a number of artificial measures that a sincere yogi may adopt in order to control the senses, Patanjali Muni in his Yoga Sutra, I think it's Sutra number 47 if I'm not mistaken, he writes, Ishvara Pranidhanadva, or, as an alternative, you can simply fix your mind on God. Simply put, Ishvara Pranidhanadva. You can do this by fixing your mind on God. And Prabhupada has just given us the method to do that. You engage everything that you have. As Krishna says elsewhere in the Bhagavad-gita, what is that verse? Manishtas tatparayana. Anybody know the verse I'm thinking of? Tad buddhayas, tad atmanas, tad nishtas, tatparayana, ityadi. He says, you fix your mind, you fix your faith, give me your senses, your intelligence, so many things, whatever you have. Yadashnosi, yadjahoshi, yadadasi, yadtapasyasi, yadkaroshi, ityadi. These are the ideas. So that is called Ishvara Pranidhana, to just settle in Ishvara, to be fixed on God. And then Prabhupada adds, the so-called yogis who meditate on something other than Vishnu simply waste their time in a vain search after some phantasmagoria. Sometimes those of us who are unfortunate enough to have heard from such dubious so-called yogis of the modern age, at best they will advise you to fix your mind on something void. Maybe a candle flame or some meaningless syllable or so many things. But the Srimad-Bhagavatam confirms the Vedic position, which is Dhyanavastitatat gadena manasa tashyantiyam yoginaha. The real yogis, they fix their mind on Lord Vishnu in meditation. So Prabhupada makes it as unmistakably clear as is his hallmark. He says in concluding here, we have to be Krishna conscious, devoted to the personality of Godhead. This is the aim of the real yoga. Classic Srila Prabhupada. You can see here. So these are some of the things we can think about here. As I mentioned, the verses, there's several cluster of verses here, they kind of all illustrate the principle of the need to control the senses and exactly how we can do so. But in the Bhagavad-gita, Krishna himself doesn't really unpack this, the full range of possibilities of this verse. For that we require the mercy of the predecessor acharyas, and particularly that of His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, who has taught us so simply how can we become Krishna conscious, how can we control our senses nicely. He said chanting, dancing, feasting, and philosophy. If we just become absorbed in these things, which are permeating the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, automatically our senses will be controlled. I was walking along the Parikrama Marg this morning and came by a nice chopai, a Braj Pasha poem, written on the wall there. He says, Sri Radha Nama Leya Jokoi, what is it? Sahajihi Damodara Vashahoy. That means the person who takes the name of Srimati Radharani, he effortlessly brings Lord Damodar within his control. So here the word is being used in this verse also, Vasha. Vasha means control, to have something subjugated, something that you dominate. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada would even go so far as to say that the Mayavadi project is to become God. But the Vaishnavas will not stop there. The Vaishnavas want to become greater than God. But you can only do this by pure devotional service. Because it is a submissive kind of domination. We dominate the Lord by displaying genuine love, which is a foreign thing. It's an alien thing in this material world. Genuine love really doesn't exist in this world. It's only applicable to God. And this is the love that Krishna displays here in Vraja, as we sing, Iti driksvalila bhirananda kunde sughosham nimajjantam akhyapayantam tadiyesha tagneshu bhaktair jatatvam punah prematastam shatavrti vande. That means, I am showing the people who are the yogis and the jnanis and the non-devotees in general, those who may be impressed by my opulences only. I'm showing them that I can only be conquered by this love. How am I showing it? By drowning the people of Gokula, my mataras, those who are really devoted to me. I'm drowning them in so many ananda kundas, so many pools of ecstasy, in the form of these leelas that I perform here. So we're very fortunate tonight. We're sitting in Sri Dham Vrindavan, and we're hearing Krishna's instructions as they have been explained by our predecessor acharyas, and particularly by Srila Prabhupada. We're very, very fortunate. We should take advantage of these instructions. The prominent way in which we do this, I think everybody knows, in this age of Kali Yuga, we've already kind of hinted already by quoting the poem I saw on the wall. We chant the holy name, and particularly we chant this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Sometimes they say that the devotees, those who are devotees of Srimati Radharani, they're always talking about Krishna and glorifying Krishna's names, his fame, his form, his qualities, because they're trying to elicit the mercy of Srimati Radharani. And those are the things that she loves to hear. On the other hand, those who are the devotees of Krishna, they're trying to also please Krishna by describing the wonderful names, fame, form, and pastimes of Srimati Radharani. So we're very, very lucky in that we've been given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, even in this otherwise hopeless age of Kali, we've been given this wonderful Maha Mantra that has both together. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Mixing up Radha and Krishna. Prabhupada said it is like they're dancing on our tongues. If we are chanting with sincerity and purity, without offenses. And the wonder of the process is that it is so powerful. This simple process is so powerful that even if we chant with offenses, those offenses will cease, depending on the intensity of our endeavor. Therefore, Bhagavatam, as we heard in class the other morning, Bhagavatam advises Tivra Bhakti. Tivra Bhakti means intense devotion. In this way. So Prabhupada has given us in this purport very nice illustration of the principles that are stated here, and those that are elaborated by the predecessors. He's given us a very concrete and specific example of how to engage in devotional service in this way, with the example of King Ambarish. It's been said, Srila Prabhupada himself said, that these purports are his emotional ecstasies. And it's a great mystery to understand what it was about Ambarish Maharaj that Prabhupada decided to put this into the purport. As I said, maybe some other acharya has made this correlation, I don't know, but at least it seems to me that Ambarish is a perfect example of the principle here, that if we want to engage any one of these senses that have been specified in these verses from the Bhagavatam, then we just have to follow the example of this great devotee, King Ambarish. Okay, so I'll stop there. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yes, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. You mentioned earlier that we have to control our senses because it's not a direct experience of the soul when it has experience through the senses. And Ambarish Maharaj, he used his senses to be fully situated in transcendental consciousness, Matpara consciousness, Krishna consciousness. I was just wondering, what if you're using your senses, but your experience is not that of Ambarish Maharaj, but akin to the one where you're having a dual experience of the world rather than the spiritual experience?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In fact, we do live in two worlds at once, as sadhakas in Krishna consciousness. That is to say, as devotees in the sense that we are sponsored by a pure devotee. We're probate devotees, I like to say. Probate means we're on probation. We're actually criminals. That's The prima facie evidence of that fact is the material body that we are now sitting in and trying to engage in Krishna's service. We are criminals. We have a criminal mentality that must be rectified if we are to enter into the mysteries of this divine process. And in the beginning at least, hopefully only at least in the beginning, we're just basically sponsored by causeless mercy, especially that of the spiritual master, but also of the Vaishnava, and sometimes Krishna directly also. And so we're living in two worlds in that condition. Sometimes we're in the material world, and sometimes we're in the spiritual world, and in a strange sort of way, sometimes it seems to be both of them at the same time. So it is difficult in that respect. I'm not sure I actually understand your question, except that maybe you're asking what does someone do in that condition. So the idea is, I mentioned at the end, we just turn up the flame. And that means we just intensify our efforts at Tivra Bhakti. To intensify the efforts means not necessarily that we deprive ourselves of sleep or other needs that we require to stay stable. And that's a very important point as well. Yukta asita is the word used in this verse. Yukta means proper, I mentioned. And asita means to be stable, to be situated, to be grounded, maybe is a buzzword that we can use in modern parlance. That's why we have spiritual masters, because the spiritual master is able to see from a transcendental perspective, but he has enough empathy that he can understand what our struggles are, what our attachments are, what our desires are, what our situation, what our adhikar is. And he can direct us accordingly. That's a very, very important point. We not only depend on the sponsorship of the spiritual master to make our efforts count as devotional service, but we require his clear guidance and tangible instructions in our day-to-day affairs in order to direct those efforts in such a way that they actually elevate us. Yasya prasadat bhagavat prasadaha. His mercy is that of the Supreme Lord, coming through him as the Matpara devotee that we would like to be. Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, I was meditating on his song, Gurudeva Kripa Bindu Diya Koro Edase Tranabheka Atihin. If you study that song, just give it some very careful thought, you will see that it functions as a commentary on the third verse of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's Shikshastika, Trinadapi Sunichena Ityadi. Because he's telling us how to become more humble than a blade of grass, how to become more tolerant than a tree, how to become freed from the desire for honor, and how to be ready to respect all other living beings. And this morning I was reading this entire chapter. As I do every day, I try to read a chapter of Bhagavad-gita every day. And I was noticing that the lessons that Krishna is really driving at in the beginning especially of this chapter are very simple. He's telling us that you are not your body. He's telling us that the person who understands that he is not or she is not the body is able to tolerate things. That is also the person who can feel more humble than a blade of grass, the person who is vigata spriha, or as Bhaktivedanta Thakur said, sprihahina, devoid of any desire for whether it be honor or whatever. So, if we can take shelter of the spiritual master in this way, and particularly if we study the songs that are given by our acharyas, I'm thinking of the one that Srila Prabhupada asked us to sing every morning, not for no reason. It's so deep, that song. And this one from Bhaktivedanta Thakur also. If we try to refine our relationship with our spiritual master, and if we pray for his mercy and follow his instructions faithfully, then we can be elevated that way. Even though we are as if trying to practice something that seems alien to us because of our conditioning. Is that clear enough? I mean, we're living in two worlds at once, it's a fact, because we oscillate. Sometimes we're in Maya, that is to say Mahamaya, and sometimes we're inclined to Yoga Maya. So it's going to be a dualistic experience in that way. But gradually, or as Krishna says, Shanai Shanayuru Paramed, as we fix the mind in the ways that are described, towards the ideal that is described in these verses, then we gradually become freed from those lesser tendencies, if we get mercy. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. It's not a mechanical process. Okay.
I have one follow-on question.
Please.
It seems like your answer hinges a lot on the word tivra, and the need to really ratchet it up, the intensity.
It's a question of magnitude, yeah, it is. I mean, in that, Prabhupada says the child who's screaming loudest is going to get more attention from the mother. So that's why we chant the way we do. If we chant like that, then we get more mercy, generally.
Aside from chanting, because I guess I wouldn't know how, but in terms of devotional service, tivra, intense, are there some aids or things that will just ratchet your intensity up?
Intensity, as I said, it's not just a matter of volume or I want to say, extremity perhaps. Intensity also involves very careful, discriminate, directed effort, strategic effort. So that's a very important thing, and for that we require the help of these books. Reading Srila Prabhupada's books is something that many, perhaps even most members of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness do not do. And Prabhupada I can say that with authority because Prabhupada himself said that. That was his criticism, at least then. I think the situation hasn't changed that much, because I know from my own experience it's also something I've observed. But we don't have the direction that we require unless we have the discrimination that comes from the intelligence provided for us in Srila Prabhupada's books. Why did he work so hard while the rest of the world slept to provide us with these very carefully chosen words? Because he knew that when somebody needed the direction that he's provided here, Krishna would guide them to the right place. That only happens if we make the effort. If we take one step towards Krishna, he will take 10 steps towards us. So reading Srila Prabhupada's books is one very powerful thing, and there's a certain way that we're advised to read by Srila Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. While discussing the 5 most important practices of devotional service, Srila Rupa Goswami qualifies that we have to hear the Srimad-Bhagavatam in the company of advanced devotees, more advanced devotees especially. Rasikai Saha, along with those who are rasiks, those who have a taste for these topics, those who are matpara, as Krishna said. You see? So to associate with the devotees, to hear from Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada is available not only in his books, he says so many recordings are there that we can hear. We have to really make an effort. That's why Narottam Das Thakur has said, Guru Mukha Padma Bhakko Chitete Kori Aiko Aro Na Kori Humani Asha. He says, you just make those instructions that are available to you the same thing as what your heart naturally aspires after, and then don't think about anything else. Do not distract yourself or pay attention to other things. That's the vyavasayatmika buddhi that Krishna mentions in this chapter. according to Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. Is that clear? Anything else? 6:30. If not, then thank you very much. All glory to Srila Prabhupada.